Why did he come in at this point? So we know that the world is built on 3 pillars. It says in Pirkei Avos, Torah, Vavoda, and Gemilas Chasodim. And the Meforshim immediately compare those to the 3 Avos. Gemilas Chasodim, of course, is Avram Avinu. Avoda, Such Basoda, Tefillah, Esponenus, inner work, that's Yitzhak Avinu. And Torah, well, that's Yankov, but maybe not just Yankov. But we'll come to that in a moment. Because there are in fact 2 sorts of Torah. There's Torah Sheb'Ksav and Torah Sheb'al Peh. It's not so incidental that at this point where the level of Torah in the binyan was to be built, that Yitzhak and Rivka had twins. Because when we look at when the Torah was given into the world, the month of Sivan, what's the sign of that month? What's the sign of Gemini?
Twins.
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 Twins. There's 2 Torahs. There's Torah Sheb'Ksav and Torah Sheb'al Peh. They're twins, but they're different. Yeah, they're nearly identical, but not quite. The Torah of Torah Sheb'Ksav relates to Yitzhak again, relates to the period in Eretz Yisrael. It's Tanakh, it's Nevuah, it's openness. We're living in with the Beis Hamikdash. Torah Sheb'al Peh, although the root of it is the Mishnayos, the fact is, our limited Torah, the way we, through the system of Gedorim and Yeshivas, develop a Torah mind, and the root of our halachas, how we actually live, Shulchan Aruch, is not purely the Mishnayos, and it's not Talmud Yerushalmi, it's Talmud Bavli, which was written in Golos. So the Pri Tzaddik explains that Torah Sheb'Ksav is the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, and Talmud Bavli, Torah Sheb'al Peh, is the Torah of Golos. That's the difference. Now we might begin to see why there were 2 boys born at this point. Let's have a look at those 2 boys. What was the first difference the Torah tells us about them? Yankov Avinu was Yoshev HaHolim. Well, she explains from Chazal, he was sitting in Shiva learning all day. Right? He learned from Avraham, he learned from Yitzhak, he learned from Shem, and he learned from Ava. In other words, he stayed in Eretz Yisrael, in the holiest environment, the tents of these great people, and he was busy with Torah, and therefore he represents the idea of this level of Torah Sheb'Ksav, of Eretz Yisrael, of continuity. Esav, and if we didn't have the prophecy, we'd be no wiser than Yitzhak at this point. We wouldn't know he was a naughty boy. What was he doing? He was an Ish Soda. Not like his father, Such Basoda, just wandering in the field, davening. He was fighting out there. He was hunting. He was going into a dangerous territory. He was leaving the protection of the tents and their sanctity, and he was going out into an arena which demanded, well, bravery, courage, fighting the highest royas, which of course can also be symbolic of the negative spiritual forces which are in the world. So there's a hint here that he's following the path of Rivka. He's going into a challenging environment, and he's fighting with it. And that begins to line him up with the Torah of Golos, but we'll develop that a little bit more as we go along. We can also understand the work of the 3 Avos by comparing them to 3 Zemanim in Jewish history. That's the 3 periods of the Beis Hamikdash, Bais Rishon, Bais Sheni, and Bais Shlishi. The Orach Chaim explains that the Bais Rishon acted like a magnet. It says, I couldn't remember quite where it is, but I believe it's in one of the Dvorim Sedras, that as long as the Jews were living up to the level of deserving the Bais Rishon, and as we explained, they had all the accoutrements of Nevuah and kingship and the Sanhedrin, the Shekhinah was so prominent in the Beis Hamikdash that actually they didn't need to go out into the wider world to masakin it, which is the job of Klal Yisrael, to masakin the effects of the het. Rather, the Orach Chaim explains that the Beis Hamikdash acted like a magnet and drew the Netzitzes out of the whole world and into Eretz Yisrael. So you find Gerim came up to Yerushalayim and they converted. No one had to go out and find them. Yona's sailors came up to Yerushalayim. Rus came to Eretz Yisrael, and various other examples. It drew things in. So if we look at Avram Avinu, after the first few months of all this travelling around and running to Mitzrayim, we actually find that almost all the rest of his life he was camped either of one of 2 places. Either he was in Beersheba or he was in Hebron. He didn't do any travelling around. Travellers came to him. He stood in one place and people came to him and were Megaya. And it was Boiker, Shachris. Everything's sunshine, everything's open, everything's chesed. The relationship with Hashem is very smooth and beautiful. He embodied the avodah of the first Beis Hamikdash, because each of the three Avos is called in Chazal. Their home is called a Beis Hamikdash. It's the first Mikdash Ma'at. And the Meforshim say he cried so much when Sora died. He wept so much because their Beis Hamikdash had been made horov. Yeah, like Yoka, others bring this idea. So that's the first level. Second Beis Hamikdash was partly built by the funding from Kairosh, and most of the people were still in exile. They never came back. They were Mahoduvad Kush, and most of them never actually came back. They stayed scattered hither and thither all over the world. An afternoon, Rashi explains, Bein Boim is the idea that we've moved beyond the zenith of the sun and the shadows are beginning to form, and we're beginning to come into a twilight period. So we have a mixture of good and bad, and they talk about Mincha being the time of Iskabras the Dinim, when the Dinim get worse. The Beis Hamikdash Sheni didn't have that Gilui Shchina of the first one, and it suffered a lot of problems all the way through. There were enemies involved, and then the Greeks came in and the Romans came in. And Yitzhak is that middah of Surch Besoda. He's not in a tent all the time. He has to begin to wander in the field already. Things are not quite so much at home as it was. Also, the main problems that happen in the Bayis Sheni are internal, because we see the development of various groups of Apikosim, the Mishyavnim, the Tzedukim, the Baisusim, etc. And the middah of Yitzhak, Surch Besoda, was to look inwards within himself. Gevura, which is his middah, is a kovishus yitzro. It's not about going out and fighting outside with people. It's about working on your inner problems and in yourself. Your kovish, your yitzro, not somebody else's. Your yetzer. Further, the Arizal explains that he had two sons like Esav and Yankov because his quality Gevura, or Bina, as it's also known on a high level, is to divide good from bad inside yourself. And he did it so thoroughly that he had an essentially good son, who had an atiyah to goodness. Of course, he had free will and could have thrown it all away. And he had an essentially evil son who had a lot more potential and had a much bigger fight on his hands to try and get himself back into goodness, and failed. But the Eila Tolados Yitzhak, that's the process that Yitzhak developed, which divided things. And we find a division in Klal Yisrael as people are going totally to Apikosis in the second Bayis Sheni, or they're like Matziohu and his sons are going totally to the good.
You're saying in one cell it was divided because there was one woman involved. By Avrom there was also a division between Yishmael and Yitzchak.
But two women.
But two women. Here
yes.
There was one woman, so the division was more actual.
Internal. Yes. Yes, very good. That's the Bayis Sheni, and that's Yitzchak.